So I've been gone a whole minute, and in that time, a whole lot of movie news has been happening. News that is pretty interesting and honestly kind of funny and could be a game changer when it comes to the future of both DC and Pixar. So I thought it would be a good idea to take some extra time and gather all of that information that has come out about these two movies into one nice and clear video. Again, I thought about doing that. Instead, I decided to watch Hoodwinked 2: Hood vs. Evil. Now, if you don't know what Hoodwinked is, I recommend watching some YouTube videos out there that give you a full deep dive and explanation of what that movie is. Wait, I make videos on YouTube. Hoodwinked is a 2005 animated movie starring Anne Hathaway as Little Red Riding Hood, and you're probably wondering, what the hell is Anne Hathaway doing in this ugly looking movie? Well, this was pretty early in her acting career. At the time, the only thing she was known for was pretty much The Princess Diaries and showing her tits in Brokeback Mountain. Anyways, Hoodwinked was a pretty standard twist on the fairy tale stories that Shrek popularized a few years before, but what made Hoodwinked a little more unique was its story structure. See, Hoodwinked didn't just follow the typical linear storytelling path, where we would go from point A to point B to point C. Instead, it opted to go with the non-linear way of storytelling, where the same story is repeated just through the eyes of the different characters in the movie, and as the story continues and we get the different perspectives of each character, the narrative begins to change. It's done surprisingly well, and I can't recommend it enough. Though it's not the best looking movie, like even for its time, it was not that great looking, but when you have a budget of around $8 million, some compromises need to be made, and it was a good bet. The movie made well over $100 million, and because of its surprise success at the box office, a sequel for Hoodwinked was inevitable. And in 2011, the world was introduced to Hoodwinked 2: Hood vs. Evil, and good God, it looks horrible. Now, I'm not one to shit talk movies. Okay, I talk a lot of shit about movies, but this one in particular hurts to badmouth because of how much I enjoyed the original. But I gotta work on getting monetized, and talking shit about a 2011 animated movie seems to be the right path. The fuck am I doing? First off, let's talk about its animation, because it's the most noticeable change from the original. Because of how well Hoodwinked did, they upped the budget by a pretty significant amount to around $30 million compared to the previous $8 million that the original had. And somehow, with even more money, Hoodwinked 2 looks so much worse. Some of the character models look awful, while others are just okay. The only model that I do like is that of Red, but she's not enough to save this movie. And while she does have the better model out of anyone in this movie, every time I see her walking next to somebody, I just can't help but smile because of how dumb her walk cycle looks. It looks like she's walking at different speeds than other characters, but they like move at like the same speed. It's a really weird thing to look at. We get some new characters in this movie, Hansel and Gretel, and their models are both the funniest shit I've ever seen and the most horrifying thing I've seen in quite a while. They're just so ugly in the most adorable way, and considering this franchise, if you would even call it that, doesn't have the greatest track record for designing children, I'm not surprised why we got what we got. The only upside to Hansel and Gretel is that they are voiced by Bill Hader and Amy Poehler, which is a weird thing to say about a movie like this. Speaking of voice acting, I think just about all of the main cast from the original Hoodwinked reprised their roles, and it's a pretty star-studded cast for a movie of this caliber, and that includes Patrick Warburton and Glenn Close. And if I'm being honest, at times it sounds like they're phoning it in like a little bit. Just a little bit though. It's not the worst voice acting I've ever heard. God, it's really not the worst voice acting I've ever heard.
When can I leave to be on my own? I've got the whole world to see.
Anne Hathaway unfortunately doesn't come back to reprise her role as Red because she kinda got a little bit more famous at the time this movie came out. Instead, we get Hayden Panettiere as Red Riding Hood, and it's kind of a noticeable difference if you watch both movies back to back. You hear Red's new voice in this movie and you're just like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like the girl who showed her tits in Love and Other Drugs. Okay, I'm sorry, that's the last time I'm gonna mention a movie where Anne Hathaway has shown her tits. Mainly because I can't think of another movie where she shows titty, though I really don't mind Googling it. But going back a little bit, what I think is the biggest sin when it comes to the animation is in its environments, the backgrounds of the movie. They feel very empty. A lot of the times when we go to different locations, there isn't a whole lot happening in the background. They didn't do a great job at decorating the environments, and you can tell just at a moment's glance. And when the background is a lot busier, you can't help but notice the other mistakes they made that don't give the backgrounds any additional points. Like, take for example the city. First off, it's really weird that they're in a city, like a modern ass city, when it's like a fairy tale story. Shrek made it work because they just made it look more medieval. And second, while the background is busy, it still feels just as empty as the other locations, and that's just because of how shit they designed it. Apart from not being decorated well either, they made the city like way too wide, so all of the stuff they did add like looks a lot smaller by comparison. Like the streets are one-laned, but the cars are just so hilariously tiny. Look, he's just a little guy. And the other thing I noticed when visiting the other locations is the constant reuse of models. It's supposed to be like a big city, but I constantly keep seeing the same models being reused in the background whenever there's supposed to be like a more lively scene. And it's weird to see that because that's the type of shit you see whenever a movie is trying to cut costs. But like this is like a $30 million movie, and like I know that's not a lot considering every animated movie nowadays costs like somewhere of like about $100 million, but it's like the first one had a much lower budget and did so much more with its environments and its character design. Except for the woodsman, he looks just as bad, if not worse, in the first Hoodwinked. That's probably kind of most likely why they didn't use them in the sequel now that I'm thinking about it. As far as the dialogue goes, it's pretty dog shit, to be very blunt with you. And the dialogue is probably the worst part about this movie. Yes, I even mean that it's worse than the god-awful animation, and the reason it's so bad is because it's trying way too hard to be funny, and it gets old really quick. Like, you know how every character in Marvel movies nowadays has to be like all quippy and sarcastic, and it just do little jokes here and there throughout the whole movie? Well, imagine that, but 1,000 times more frequent, with jokes that don't land 90% of the time. I think the funniest thing that actually happened in this movie is when like this fucking spider just pops on the screen and does this little dumbass sound that almost actually like legitimately had me in tears.
Just needed a friend.
The worst offender of this terrible humor, by and large, is Wolf. I do not like Wolf in this movie because he's just a walking sarcasm machine. He's just he's a little sarcastic in the original Hoodwinked, but Jesus fucking Christ, he's more than just like the funny guy or Wolf in that movie. Okay, you know what? Now that I'm on Wolf, I want to focus on him for like a fat juicy minute. What the like actual hell happened to his character in this movie? Okay, so like in Hoodwinked, he's like a journalist, I think, so he's just going around trying to get information, the scoop as the youth call it, over like the mystery of who's stealing all the recipes, and he gets himself into some goofy situations. Like, sure, it's a fucking kids movie, but he does stay grounded as a character. But in Hood vs. Evil, he might as well be like a completely different character. He has this like obsession with disguises and how they're extremely helpful in solving cases for the HEA, except they're not, because his disguises keep backfiring on him and make the situations even worse, and they aren't even good disguises either. Like, he has like two, like this shitty white long beard and like this top hat, and like that's it. He doesn't even change clothing or like anything, so I'm not even sure what fucking crack he's been smoking to make him think he's that good to only need those things. And he has like a bigger range of disguises in the original. Like, I have like this sneaky suspicion that they just didn't want to make any more models for the characters. Like, the reuse of models in the background kind of solidifies that theory for me. Oh, and going off topic a little bit, but now that I'm remembering something, Twitchy is kind of weird in this movie too. Like, he's still like just as like fucking annoying as he was in the original, but something sort of magical happens with him in Hood vs. Evil. See, if you don't know anything about Twitchy, his gimmick as a character is that he talks super fast. Like imagine if Alvin and the Chipmunks did crack. Like, that's the best way I can describe him. And well, there is a moment in Hood vs. Evil when he sort of has like a heart-to-heart moment with Wolf, but I really couldn't focus on anything that was being said because for some reason they did not speed up his voice in the scene. He's just straight up talking at a normal speed, but they just like pitched it up, and that shit absolutely flabbergasted me. Apparently the guy who voices Twitchy like said, I think he told like the director or some shit about how Twitchy's voice is made, because that scene was really weird to him. And from my understanding, it seems like he didn't really give a shit, so that's how we ended up with like the most cursed scene in this entire movie. It also doesn't help that the scene that led up to this moment was whenever Twitchy was like kicking out like two female squirrels out of his like little house in order to have like a private conversation with Wolf. And I really don't like how this scene implies that Twitchy has so much riz, that he gets so much squirrel puss, that he is such a Chad that he might have almost had a threesome that night. right? And like, you know how I've just been talking shit about the animation, like some of the characters and like how bad the dialogue is. I haven't been thinking about all of that. All I could think about was Twitchy having constant orgies. Like, I haven't been able to sleep at night because the thought of Twitchy just straight up fucking someone is haunting me. This is why this video's been taking so goddamn long to finish, because I can't focus on anything else besides this one scene in this pretty shit movie from like over a decade ago. Jesus Christ, what the fuck is happening in my life at this point? Okay, aside from all of that, I do believe that there was a good movie somewhere here. Like, see, my favorite part of Hood vs. Evil was when it ended. And I'm not saying that to be an asshole. Like, let me make that very clear. But once the credits start rolling, alongside the names and like the roles, I guess the fucking what you call it, they included what seemed like storyboards from this movie. At least I think that's what they were. And when I saw them for the first time, I was just like, where the hell was that in the movie? The images look significantly better than anything I saw in the actual movie. Scenes look more alive and have such more personality to them. They're more stylized, and I just wish they would have gotten closer to what they were going for than what we actually got. It would have been really interesting to see a city with a fairy tale twist to it for our characters to go and explore, but instead we got the cheapest rendition of it. And honestly, this could have been a much better movie, and all we needed was just probably a little bit more money to fully see it through. That, or a director that actually cared about this movie. But those were just my thoughts on it. I'm curious to know what you guys all thought of Hoodwinked 2, Hood vs. Evil. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Does Twitchy's threesome scene haunt you like it haunts me? Let me know down in the comments. I'm curious to know if you have other similar thoughts about this movie as I do. And if there's another shitty little movie that y'all want to watch me like talk shit about, let me know as well. I'm open to anything. I basically kind of have like no self-respect, so I'll watch the absolute worst of the worst. Anyways, subscribe, leave me a like, and I'll see y'all next time.